The development of the sex instinct during childhood. Every sexual animal on Earth, including us humans, is born with a powerful instinct, encoded deep in the brain's neural networks, the sex instinct. Like a hidden blueprint, it begins unfolding in childhood and blossoms fully at puberty, guiding sexual behavior. Sexual orientation, whether straight or LGBT, is one of the outcomes of this instinct. It is not a matter of choice. Instead, it emerges from the intricate dance between nature and nurture. Biology provides the framework, while experience shapes the details. Most scientists agree on that much. But here's the puzzle: the underlying biology is still not fully explained. In this presentation, I'll share an explanation that draws from well-established scientific evidence and everyday observations, one that reveals how childhood development shapes the pathways leading to sexual behavior at puberty. Understanding this biology is more than just science. It helps us reduce controversy, soften stigma, and ease the anguish that so often surrounds these topics. So, stay with me, you may find yourself surprised. Before we get into the model itself, let's explain briefly what is micropsychology. Micropsychology deals with the relationships between brain and mind. It combines our understanding of biology with our understanding of psychology. Micropsychology breaks complex behaviors that are traditionally the domain of psychology into partial microbehaviors and studies them one at a time. The results of those studies are then carefully applied to the whole behavior. Both psychology and micropsychology deal with cause and effect relationships between elements of behaviors. A main difference between psychology and micropsychology is in the scope of the behaviors that they deal with. Micropsychology deals with basic behaviors such as instincts, brain activity programs, reflexes, and with the interactions between them. Unlike psychology, micropsychology describes behaviors using general information handling mechanisms that the brain uses, such as grouping and classifying of objects, recording associations between events, associative retrieval of information, and the likes. Although the detailed biology of those brain activities at the neural networks level is not completely known, it is clear that the brain uses them in its operations. In the following, their roles in various behaviors will be described. Here is an hypothetical example that illustrates the micropsychological approach of explaining behaviors. Tom likes to have cookies with his coffee. He has 4 coffee cups and 6 cookies. They are represented in his brain as concepts. These pictures denote their brain representations. The code that the brain uses for representing its concepts is not known. It appears that the strengths of the connections between neurons is like the ink with which the information of the concepts is written by the brain. It also appears that patterns of firing neurons express concepts that the brain is actively handling. However, the exact code that the brain uses for recording its concepts and the significance of various patterns of neural activation is not completely understood. Still, having said that, the representation of a cookie contains information about its looks, taste, texture, the sense of pleasure that it creates, etc. Similarly for the cup's representations. The brain automatically groups objects that have common features into classes. In Tom's case, these are the class of cookies and the class of cups of coffee. The relationships between the individual objects and their classes is part of their representations. The brain also has concepts that represent activities related to those objects, such as bring a cookie to the mouth and eat it, and bring a coffee cup to the mouth and drink. Now, Tom goes to a restaurant and the waiter brings him a coffee and a cookie. Tom's brain first associates the cookie and the cup with their class representations. Then, the brain associates those representations with the representations of their related activities. Now, Tom knows how to eat the cookie and drink the coffee. That is exactly what he does. There are, of course, many more details to those situations. Grouping similar objects into classes and using similar objects in the same activities are common brain operations that occur in many microbehaviors. This is how micropsychological approach explains the underlying biology of microbehaviors. In the following, we apply micropsychological methods for analyzing sexual and gender-dependent behaviors. We will add more details about the micropsychological approach that are relevant to the discussed behaviors. Sex is a prime motivator and a common denominator for all of us. We are usually aware of the sex of the people around us. The brain combines that piece of information with other information as it regulates our activities. That may explain why sex is a factor in so many human activities. In the following, we will use micropsychology for analyzing how certain instincts that depend on the sex of other people evolve during childhood. We will analyze the contribution of such instincts to sex-related behaviors. The instincts will play the role of behaviors, and their stages will play the roles of the micro-behaviors in our micropsychological analysis. We will start by describing general brain information processing mechanisms that participate in the development of those behaviors. Humans are social animals. Early in life, children develop perceptions about their society and how they relate to it. They know from a very early age that society is made up of interrelated classes of people. They also know how to interact with individuals of each class, and how to interact with the class as a whole. Children develop such perceptions due to the general mechanisms that the brain uses for organizing the information about the world. The brain divides the world that we sense into objects. It then groups objects that have similar properties into classes. Based on experiences, it adds new objects to existing classes, divides classes into subclasses, and combines existing classes to form new umbrella classes. That makes life much simpler for us, as the following examples will show. At a very early age, children can distinguish between members of the class of grown-ups and members of the class of little ones. Within the class of the little ones, children can distinguish between those that are their own size, their peers, those that are tiny, and those that are bigger than themselves. All those classifications are based on the sizes of the various humans. The brain has general circuitry that classifies similar objects according to their relative sizes. It can also divide a class into subclasses according to the sizes of their objects. The brain is apparently applying those basic classification skills also for classifying humans by their size. That is one of the brain mechanisms that enable children to distinguish between adults, youngsters, big children, peers, and babies of various ages. Within the class of grown-ups, children can distinguish between those that are like their mother, the women, and those that are like their father, the men. The concepts men and women evolve with time. Newborns can discriminate between human voices of high pitch and low pitch. Initially, they form two classes of humans based on those features. Those that talk with a high pitch, like their mother, and those that talk with lower pitch, like their father. With more experiences, those classes are automatically expanded based on other features that are associated with the pitch of the person's voice. Those features include man-made features, such as clothes and hairdos, and natural features such as smooth women's faces or rough men's faces. With time, the classes are further expanded to include more natural features, such as sex-typical body contours. Children learn to distinguish between boys and girls. They understand that boys are like men, and girls are like women. That is what everyone is telling them. And it matches the clothes and hairdos that children see around them. Oh, yes, and it also matches the bathrooms that they use. Most children feel affiliated with groups corresponding to their own sex. At puberty, the new youngsters switch groups. Girls become women, and boys become men. Those affiliation shifts of the youngsters go hand in hand with a new feeling that they feel. That is the feeling of sexual drive, which is one of the forces that drives sexual behavior. Those transitions happen together with the changes in the youngsters' voices that announce to the world their sexual maturity. Those perceptions about gender and sex and the ways that they emerge during childhood are universal. They have been perceived like that throughout history, all over the world. They are supported by the brain's neural networks. In the following, we apply the micropsychological approach for studying the sexual and gender instincts and their development during childhood. We divide those instincts into smaller parts and analyze the details of their operation. We will start with the common sexual instinct, one of many. In the following, we will refer to it as the sex instinct. The sex instinct is a goal-oriented behavior that has several stages. Each stage is controlled by its brain activity program. The stages are: seeking. Start looking for a mate. Recognition. Recognize the sex of people around you. This is also a stage of other instincts, such as gender-related instincts. Attraction. Another person becomes sexually attractive. During this stage, various activities that include approaching, touching, aligning the bodies, and a wide variety of sensory and mental interactions that vary from person to person take place. Those activities build up sexual arousal that has physical and emotional components. Copulation. This stage is characterized by strong feelings of pleasure that are triggered by stimulation of erogenous areas, in synchrony with the progression of the physical process. Aftermath. Updating brain memory records for future implementations. Each of the stages has its own emotions and creates its own memory records. Stages may overlap and may be parts of other instincts and activity programs. Let's start with the seeking stage. Seeking a mate is the first stage of the sex instinct. In many animals, it marks a shift from a food-foraging state of mind to a sexual state of mind. Many predators and plant-eating animals rely on traces of sex pheromones carried by the wind to locate distant mates. Their sex instinct, activated by seasonal and internal triggers, initiates the physical flamen response, which exposes their specialized pheromone-sensing organs. Once they catch a whiff of these pheromones, they follow the scent doggedly to a potential mate. In humans, the sex instinct becomes active at puberty. Although it likely does not depend on pheromones, it initiates mate-seeking behavior that is strongly influenced by various social instincts and norms. Have you ever wondered how we automatically recognize the sex of the people around us just by looking? We can immediately tell who is a woman and who is a man. We don't have to think about it, our brain does it instinctively. It is amazing. How do we learn, starting at a very early age and throughout life, to recognize the sex of other people by just their looks? Sex recognition is both nature and nurture. Nature is also referred to as innate, something that we are born with, as opposed to nurture, which is something that we learn from experience, both on our own or by being taught by others. For decades, scientists have been trying to understand the interaction between the nature and nurture parts of sex recognition. Is it based on pheromones? As of today, no such pheromones that are routinely used by humans for sex recognition were found. We mostly use our vision for sex recognition, but how does it work? Are there some sets of basic visual features, such as proportions between body parts, that we rely upon? And are those proportions universal? Do all humans have them? Could those visual features be recognized by children and adults everywhere? The jury is still out. There is plenty of overlooked evidence, both in the scientific literature and in common knowledge, that could explain the basics of sex recognition. In the following, it is suggested that the voices of men and women are the main nature component of sex recognition. It will be explained how the voices of men and women shape our visual sex recognition skills throughout our lives. We base our sex recognition on cues that other people broadcast. As far as sex recognition is concerned, the concept woman and the concept man consist of their sets of cues. When a woman broadcasts certain combinations of those cues, we conclude that that person is a woman. Similarly, when a man broadcasts other sets of cues, we conclude that that person is a man. Some of those cues are man-made, such as clothes and hairdos, and some are natural, such as voice, chest contours, mustaches. Interestingly, we very rarely base our sex recognition on the external sex organs, which are the most reliable cues. Usually, clothes are hiding the external sex organs from view. Most often, we base our sex recognition on visual cues. We rely on auditory cues when we hear them. Touching and smelling are rarely used for sex recognition. In order to understand the relationships between the cues, let's look first at some experimental evidence gleaned from fetuses. Experiments have demonstrated that fetuses at the gestation age of 16 weeks start to respond to external sounds. At around 30 to 40 gestation weeks, they discriminated between the following pairs of sounds: human voice and non-human sounds, their mother's voice and another woman's voice, their mother's voice and their father's voice, the sounds of two different languages, and the sounds of two piano tones. Those conclusions are based on observed responses of the fetuses to those stimuli. Their responses included variations in heart rate patterns and movements of body parts such as limbs and jaws. Those responses appear to be under the reflexive control of the brainstem. Postnatal life experiences and further development of their bodies and brains, especially brain cortical areas, are necessary for establishing full-fledged sex recognition capabilities. Those findings suggest that the fetal brain has innate capabilities to discriminate between sounds. It can discriminate between human voices based on their pitch. It forms rudimentary concepts that contain only the auditory cues. Two of those rudimentary concepts are the concept woman and the concept man. At this point, woman means human voice of high pitch.
Abracadabra supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Man means human voice of low pitch.
Abracadabra supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Right at birth, the newborn's brain could only discriminate between those two rudimentary concepts of men and women, based on their voices. After birth, the baby's brain starts to develop together with the rest of the body. The perceptions of the baby about the world depend on the baby's actual experiences and the state of his or her brain and body at that time. During the first 3 months of their life, babies are held close to the faces of their parents and caregivers. With their developing visual systems, the babies extract visual cues of those adults' faces and heads. The baby's brain groups together cues that the baby sees at the same time. Several concepts are being formed this way, both sex-specific and sex-neutral. Two new sex-specific concepts that are formed now are the visual woman and the visual man. They include visual cues of women and men, respectively. Most of the cues that make up those concepts are arbitrary man-made cues such as hairdos, clothings, treated facial hair, and colored lips. Experiments have shown that at this stage, babies do not associate the visual concepts that are based on arbitrary man-made cues with the natural, auditory sex-specific concepts. The visual concepts are not yet tied with sex. For the babies, the auditory woman and the visual woman are two different objects. Similarly, the auditory man and the visual man are also two different objects. During the following months, babies learn to associate between auditory and visual cues. Now, their concepts man and woman consist of both auditory and visual cues. The children pick up visual features that are associated with the voices of the men and women that broadcast them. Some of those features are man-made, such as hairdos and colored lips. Those are typical to the society in which the child grows up. Others are natural, such as smooth faces of women. All those cues become visual cues of the mental categories men and women. The children use them for recognizing the sex of the people in their society. This is how visual women features become cues of the mental category woman, and visual men's features become cues of the mental category men. The collective mind of the society in which the child is embedded have designed the man-made cues to act as sex recognition cues. The neural networks of the brain have now implemented it. As babies start to move around, they see the adults from various vantage points. they pick up new whole body cues. Those new cues are associated with the voices of the adults, and also with existing visual cues that were learned previously. For example, the round, wavy curves of women's body could have been associated with a woman's voice and/or with her hairdo. The pants of a man could have been associated with his voice and/or his mustache. For those time frames, MRI and other imaging studies revealed that cortical brain regions, which process auditory information, have shown increased responses to human voices compared to non-human sounds. Increased responses were observed also to emotional voices compared to calm voices. Those involved cortical brain regions have just become functional and could handle such information. In summary, we have seen the roles that the voices of men and women play in the development of sex recognition. The voices of women and men are the primary innate cues around which sex recognition evolves. Innate and man-made visual features that are associated with the auditory cues, directly and indirectly, become cues of sex recognition. Throughout life, secondary visual sexual features, such as thighs to waist and shoulders to waist ratios, could be learned and become cues through their associations with the auditory cues and with previously learned man-made visual cues. In deaf children, innate visual, tactile, and olfactory cues must be playing the roles of the innate auditory cues. More studies are needed for understanding those processes. Sex recognition is an important component of many mental and behavioral processes. For references and more details, please check the link provided in the comments. The nature and nurture of sexual attraction. Many of the cues used in the recognition stage are learned visual cues. Other behaviors, such as gender-related behaviors, also have a sex recognition stage, which most likely relies on the same brain's learning mechanisms and neural networks. The next stage of the sexual instinct is sexual attraction. It relies on the outcome of the sex recognition stage, the sex of another person, which is often called the physical component of sexual attraction. The other component is often called the emotional component. There are many emotions that could participate in sexual attraction. We will first discuss the underlying biology of the physical component. The sex of the other person. In a previous presentation, we talked about sex recognition. We saw how the voices of men and women serve as innate cues that guide the brain in learning other man-made and innate sex recognition cues. As a result, we can instantly recognize the sex of other people based on many combinations of their auditory, visual, and tactile features. This is an interesting phenomenon. Although humans are visual creatures, the development of one of their most important mental processes, sex recognition, relies on the auditory system. If so, are there other mental processes whose development depends on the auditory system, and in particular, on human voice? In this presentation, we will see that indeed, the voices of men and women act as innate cues in the development of other very important mental processes, one of which is sexual attraction. We will describe how those voices participate in the development and implementation of sexual attraction, and how some brain structures participate in those processes. Sex recognition is a component of other mental activities, such as sexual attraction and gender affiliation. Both depend on it. Therefore, the voices of men and women also act as innate cues in the development of those mental activities. Those voices guide the brain in learning the cues of those mental activities. We will identify some subcortical brain areas that play a central role in the development and expression of those emotions. We will start with sexual attraction. We will focus on an information pathway that includes the thalamus, the amygdala, the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, in short, BNST, and the hypothalamus. Sensory information enters the pathway and propagates to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is an information hub. It exchanges information with many brain areas, and one of its roles is to regulate sexual activities. In addition to this general flow, the stations of the pathway interact with each other and with other brain areas all the time. Different information inputs may take different routes within that general pathway. The amygdala and the hypothalamus are small structures, the size of each is about 1% of the size of the brain. Our insights about the information flow in that pathway are the outcomes of non-invasive MRI and other imaging experiments in humans, and higher resolution invasive experiments in rodents which could not be done in humans. In general, those structures play similar roles in rodents and in humans. The general direction of the information flow is the same, from sensory inputs all the way to the hypothalamus. The stations along the pathways interact in similar ways among themselves and with other brain centers. Sex nuclei of the hypothalamus interact with the sex organs and with other brain structures in similar ways. However, there is one main difference. Rodents rely on pheromones, and humans do not. That means that behaviors that are determined by pheromonal cues in rodents are determined by non-pheromonal cues in humans. All relevant human cues, including innate and learned ones, are non-pheromonal. The question is, how to generalize from rodents to humans? Both rodents and humans have innate cues that enable them to remotely identify the sex of other members of the species, and also, by using associative learning mechanisms, to learn new cues. The combination of innate cues and associative learning mechanisms is nature's strategy of enabling a species to adapt to various environmental situations. In order to generalize from rodents to humans, it seems reasonable to look for analogies between innate cues of rodents and innate cues of humans. As we have seen, voices of men and women are the most salient innate human cues for sex recognition. Those voices emerge at puberty, the onset of sexual maturity. As such, they encode the fact that their broadcasters are sexually mature. Those voices remain effective cues throughout life. Therefore, those voices are analogs of the rodent's innate cues that encode the sex of the broadcaster and its sexual maturity. Those voices must be playing in humans the same roles that the corresponding pheromones play in rodents. They are cues that identify another conspecific as a sexually mature individual. Together with other cues, the brain figures out the reaction to that individual. Also, those auditory cues serve as a core around which other associated features of conspecifics are learned and become cues of sexual attraction. When those cues recur, they generate information streams that flow in the brain. Let's talk now about the routes that such information streams take on their way to the hypothalamus. Pheromonal stimuli are different from auditory stimuli by the ways that they enter the brain. After being pre-processed by the olfactory system, most pheromonal information is relayed directly to the amygdala and the BNST. However, in humans, after being pre-processed by the auditory system, most auditory information is relayed to the medial geniculate nucleus of the thalamus, in short, the MGN. There, some information is bifurcated. The same bifurcated information is relayed both to the amygdala and to cortical areas. Beyond the amygdala, rodents' pheromonal information and humans' auditory information continue in similar pathways to the hypothalamus. In a sense, the MGN is the human analog of the output parts of the rodent's olfactory system, namely, the main and the accessory olfactory bulbs. We assume that, like rodents, the human thalamus, amygdala, BNST, and hypothalamus pathway has two routes. One conveys female broadcasted information, and the other conveys male broadcasted information. Input information that propagates in those routes is fused with other information. Innately, those routes convey innate sex cues from sensory unit to sex centers of the hypothalamus. However, the hypothalamus does not invoke any sexual response because the sexual system is not yet mature. During childhood, using brain learning mechanisms, new cues are learned, and the innate sex instinct is expanded. At puberty, hormonal concentration changes and other factors turn the system operational, and innate and learned sex cues activate the hypothalamic sex centers. At this junction, three groups of youngsters emerge. One group is sexually attracted to women, another group is sexually attracted to men, and another group is sexually attracted to both women and men. That suggests that the connectivities of those routes with hypothalamic centers that regulate sexual arousal varies across those three groups of people. In the first group, the route that conveys female cues feeds the hypothalamic center that regulates sexual attraction. In this group, information relayed by that route would activate the hypothalamic center, and the person would be sexually attracted to females. In the second group, the route that conveys male cues feeds the hypothalamic center that regulates sexual attraction. In this group, information relayed by that route would activate the hypothalamic center, and the person would be sexually attracted to males. In the third group, both routes feed the hypothalamic center that regulates sexual attraction. This person would be sexually attracted to males and females. Other brain centers, in addition to the hypothalamus, affect sexual attraction. Here, the hypothalamus represents their combined effect. Sexual attraction is essential for the continuation of the species. Every species relies on innate sexual attraction cues. It has been suggested here that the voices of men and women are the primary innate cues, based on which humans develop their sexual attraction skills. Visual and other features that are associated with those auditory cues are learned automatically and become sexual attraction cues. Like in humans, the primary sexual attraction cues of many species are auditory. For example, birds and frogs. In those species, auditory information that encodes sexual maturity is broadcasted by individuals, and is picked up and pre-processed by the sensory systems of other individuals. It reaches the hypothalamus and regulates their sexual behaviors. Studies have shown that in general, the auditory and the pheromonal information propagate from the sensory units via the amygdala to the hypothalamic centers that regulate sexual attraction. In humans, this is only the end section of the information pathway. It would be interesting to map also the beginning sections of the human pathway, and how they connect to the end section. For example, the connections between the MGN and the amygdala. With the advent of novel non-invasive methods, it might be possible to map the complete routes that auditory-generated information take all the way to the hypothalamic centers that regulate sexual attraction. This could answer key questions about the nature and nurture of sexual attraction. A person would be sexually attracted to a mate if the mate is of the appropriate sex. But by itself, that is not enough. The mate also has to broadcast cues about certain non-sexual qualities that person desires. Together with the mate's sex, those qualities will induce sexual attraction. There are numerous such non-sexual qualities, and both male and female mates could possess them. For example, being peaceful or aggressive, active or passive, tall, short, or average height, having brown eyes, blue eyes, or whatever eye color, and so on. Different people would desire different combinations of such non-sexual qualities in their mates. What is common to those qualities is that they create emotions that are needed for sexual attraction to happen. Those emotions are woven with the physical activities of the stage. Emotions drive physical activities, who drive emotions, and so on. During childhood, children learn cues of situations that create those emotions. Later in life, when those cues occur, they create the emotions. There are several classification schemes whose aim is to describe any emotion as a combination of a set of basic emotions. Here, we describe some of the sexual emotions in a more intuitive way that could be understood without relying on such schemes. Humans are emotional. Even when it seems that we are not, we are. Defining emotions is like defining colors, flavors, or other sensations. For example, red like an apple, sour like a lemon. We can get the idea, but there are exceptions, nuances, and personal variations. A common way of describing emotions is by telling the situations in which they are felt. Adding responses of body parts makes the description more vivid. For example, I was so scared that I could not move. Emotions are intertwined with physical activities. Using scientific instrumentation such as MRI, electrocardiograms, and ultrasound, it is sometimes possible to correlate emotions and physical activities with their underlying active brain areas. We will start our discussion about sexual emotions with the emotion of feeling safe. First, we will describe the general features of that emotion. Then, we will discuss its roles in sexual attraction. One of our mental needs is to feel safe. When we feel safe, we go on with our activities. When we feel unsafe, we instinctively want to reposition ourselves in a safe situation. We look for cues of such situations, and once we identify such cues, we use them to reach safety again. We learn and use new cues of safe situations throughout our life. It starts at infancy. Being next to parents, or next to caregivers that act like parents, induces in a baby a sense of safety. Then, babies learn that also some other people induce that feeling, while some do not do so, or may even seem threatening. A basic question is this: how babies learn that it is safe to be close to their parents, or for that matter, to be close to caregivers that act like parents. Does food act as a cue for safety? It is clear that babies feel relaxed and safe while being fed. Do stimuli that are associated with the food, such as the faces of their feeding parents, become learned cues of safety? Do babies feel safe near their parents because they feed them? It looks that might be the case, doesn't it? In the 1950s, Harlow studies the interplay between those emotions. He gave infant monkeys the option of choosing between two inanimate surrogate mothers. Both were made of identical frames of wire. One had a bottle of food. The other did not have such a bottle, but was covered with soft cloth. The monkeys were fed only by their bare-wired mother. It turned out that the infant monkey spent very little time with the bare-wired feeding mother, only the time needed to eat, less than 1 hour a day. He spent the rest of the day clinging to the soft cloth mother, or close to her. By itself, that's obvious. Soft, smooth contact is more comfortable than rough one. In order to study how various external situations affect the infant, a scary mechanical creature was built. When seeing it, the infant darted to the soft mother. He clung to her, never to the bare-wired feeding mother. The body contact with his mother comforted him and reassured him. When he felt safe again, he turned around to face the threat. In another set of experiments, a monkey was put in an unfamiliar area. First, only the bare-wired mother was present. Then, only the soft-clothed mother was present. The monkey here is frozen with fear, clinging to a soft cloth, totally ignoring his bare-wired mother, which fed him all his life. When the soft mother was present, he darted to her immediately. He was hugging her, boosting his feeling of safety. Then, reassured, he explored the area, occasionally reaffirming his feeling of safety by hugging pieces of cloth and his mother. Harlow's experiments suggest that the need of food and the need of safety are two basic needs that are supported by two distinct biological subsystems. Each subsystem has its own reflexes and instincts. The tactile sensations of a large soft area serve as cues of safety. Other stimuli that are associated with those sensations become learned cues of safe situations. Those cues are linked with innate safety instincts, and together, they drive behaviors when similar situations occur. Schematically, this is how a cue is linked to an instinct to form a specific behavior. For example, the monkey had an innate instinct to run away from threats to a safe object. He embedded the new perception that the clothed wired mesh is a safe object into that innate instinct. When facing a threat, he ran to that object and clung to it. Another innate general instinct is that it is safe to be next to a safe object. He embedded his learned perception that the clothed wired mesh is a safe object into this innate instinct, and as we have seen in the second experiment, he felt safe in the presence of that object. Safety objects, such as the pieces of soft cloth, are dynamic mental concepts. Their potency may change with gained experience. For example, blankets become safety objects for babies very early in life. With age and gained experience, they lose their prominence to other objects. Those changes in status require the participation of various brain areas that can evaluate and update the perceived potency of safety objects. Humans have similar biological subsystems that support the needs of food and the needs of safety. A natural safe situation for babies is to be held close to the body of their parents and caregivers. In those situations, a large area of the baby's skin feels the soft contact of the body of another human. That sensation becomes a cue of safe situations. During those and similar experiences, babies develop an entire repertoire of safe concepts. They include actual safe individual, as well as groups of safe people. For example, these concepts could be formed in those experiences. Mother is safe, father is safe, grandma is safe, humans are safe, women are safe, men are safe, and so on. In addition, interconnected hierarchies of many more concepts are being established at the same time in the baby's brain. They include umbrella concepts such as person, woman, man, and their subconcepts such as food provider, playful person, smiling person, and so on. Those learned perceptual concepts are merged with other emotions and are embedded in a variety of innate instincts. They take part in numerous behaviors. In hugging, the sensation of body contact with another person is associated with the feeling of safety, and with other related positive emotions. We want to hug and be hugged, because it invokes in the two of us the feeling of safety and other associated positive emotions. That goes back all the way to a baby being hugged by parents and caregivers. There are other tactile sensations that act as innate safety cues. For example, those sensed during grasping reflexes. Newborns and infants grasp things that are in their reach. When they grasp parts of their caregivers, associated features of the grasped caregivers become safety cues. That may explain how, among other things, holding hands induces the mutual feelings of safety. Feeling safe is an important mental feeling. It relies on innate and learned cues. Here we talked only on some of its tactile cues. There are also safety cues of all other senses. For example, vocal intonations and facial expressions. It should be noted that the tactile sensation is only part of the cue. The rest of the cue is who is causing that tactile sensation. Is it a hug by another person, or is it the back of a chair? The opposite emotion of feeling unsafe is another important emotion. It has its own innate and learned cues that drive behaviors. Like safety cues, unsafety cues are learned during episodes of unsafe experiences. They are then linked with innate reflexes and instincts. Achieving safety and avoiding threats are survival goals that drive our behaviors. Let's see now how instincts of feeling safe and unsafe play out in sex-related and gender-related interactions. So far, we have explored how the sexual instinct evolves during childhood, as the brain automatically collects cues from non-sexual interactions with others. These cues are patterns of stimuli that occur around the child, most of them generated by humans. They include voices, the shapes of people at rest and in motion, verbal communication, and many more. Later in life, when these cues appear in entirely different situations, they help identify potential sexual partners and support a wide range of human interactions. These cues have two main components, physical and emotional. The physical component identifies elements of the situation. Which objects are present and what physical responses are possible. The emotional component anticipates the likely emotional consequences of those responses, depending in part on the body's current needs. The brain weighs internal and external factors before deciding whether to act. Sometimes the prevailing cues suggest restraint, while an internal instinctive drive pushes toward action. For example, when you are both hungry and tired. In such cases, the brain generates a positive, motivating emotion that tips the balance and triggers the instinctive response. Once the action begins, that emotion continues to drive it forward until the instinct's goal is reached. The brain can also use the same emotion to motivate different behaviors. Let's explore some of those emotions. The first emotion is thrill. We feel it in many situations, such as riding a roller coaster, climbing a wall, playing a friendly game, watching our favorite team play, and more. In all of these, the feeling blends two emotions: we feel safe, and simultaneously we feel a bit unsafe because there is risk. And we enjoy that combination of feeling. The risk may be physical, falling from the roller coaster or the wall, or emotional, losing the game. Before we engage, the thrill motivates us to begin. Once we're in, it encourages us to continue. Thrill also matters at every stage of a sexual interaction, especially when two people who haven't had sex before first feel attracted to each other. In the sex instinct, thrill is a built-in motivating emotion. It nudges people to make first contact, and once contact starts, it helps the process move to the next steps. Let's see how it works. Safety emotions play an important role in sexual interactions. Let's focus on those roles in the first sexual interactions of two participants after they have reached puberty. The approaching phase of the attraction stage, in which at least one participant approaches the other, is crucial. The sexual instincts activate brain circuits that make them want to approach and touch each other. However, both participants are aware that their domains are about to be breached, and that they are about to breach the other person's domain. This is a new situation for them, and it may feel unsafe. Other forces, such as social constraints, may also oppose the sexual drive. To strengthen the drive, the sex instinct introduces the positive emotion of thrill. This built-in emotion can shift the balance of forces in favor of continuing. However, other instinctive sensations accompany that emotion. They arise from the sexual system. They include shifts in blood flow and sensations in the sex organs, hormonal changes that affect circulation and breathing, and pleasant sensations. Together with thrill, they form the emotion of sexual attraction. As the sexual interaction continues, the same sexual emotions persist through the next stages. As parts of the sex instinct, these emotions work hand in hand with other brain programs that also regulate non-sexual behaviors. The sexual instincts deploy general brain activity programs. One such general brain program is to approach an object. Another program is to accept an approaching object. The object in the case of the sexual instinct is the other person. In sexual interactions, after touching, the participants may hug each other. In body language, that means I feel safe with you, you are safe with me. We are good. The participants may continue to do other activities together. Other general activity programs are used in other phases of the sex instinct. In addition to thrill, the sexual instinct deploys other innate motivating emotions. Powerful feelings of satisfying pleasure. Unlike thrill, these emotions occur only during sexual interactions. They are triggered by innate tactile reflexes in erogenous areas, strategically positioned to evoke the emotion at the appropriate stage of the interaction. When such an area is stimulated, the motivating emotion is evoked, and the brain evaluates the entire situation. It may either decide to continue along the instinctive sex reflex or decide to stop. Innate motivating emotions have another role beyond simply driving behavior. External stimuli that happen at the same time can become new sexual cues. When these learned cues are encountered later, they can evoke emotions such as pleasant reward feelings or the expectation of a desired outcome. This is a very important feature of the sex instinct. Unlike childhood cues, these learned cues come from situations that actually led to achieving the goals of the sex instinct. From that perspective, they are more reliable. These cues become part of the repertoire of the sex instinct. In the future, they not only motivate the later stages of arousal, but also the earlier stages of seeking a mate and approaching. They are also crucial for forming the bonds between the couple, needed to raise offsprings. The sexual activities and emotions are triggered by cues, some of which are innate and others are learned. Some cues are learned during childhood and some after puberty. The childhood cues are learned in benign, non-sexual experiences, and they are all associated, directly or indirectly, with the innate sex recognition cues, the voices of men and women. Those cues are about the sex of the partner, and other his or hers non-sexual qualities. The non-sexual childhood cues are being used for jump-starting the first full-fledged sexual interactions of novices after puberty. Those cues are what drive the sex instinct forward, moving it through the attraction phases. From simply approaching, all the way to copulation, and even into its aftermath. As these phases unfold, the brain is constantly evaluating. It weighs the outside world, the state of the body, past experiences, and the goals of the moment. Many areas of the brain take part in this process. But the amygdala is a key player. It's the one that ultimately gives the go or not go signal to the hypothalamus and other control centers. There are important differences between the cues we pick up in childhood and those we acquire after puberty. Childhood cues are learned in benign, non-sexual experiences. They come from interactions with a wide range of people, from close family members to complete strangers, and in that way, they reflect the whole society in which the child grows up. The voices of men and women are the innate cues that children rely on from birth. Based on these stable signals, the brain gradually learns to associate additional cues, especially visual ones, mostly during childhood. For example, children learn to tell men and women apart by their appearance, because those visual cues are consistently paired with the voices they hear from everyone around them. These early learned cues allow them, as they grow, to recognize the sex of other people in both sexual and non-sexual contexts. By contrast, the cues acquired after puberty, through sexual interactions, are different. With their strong feelings of sexual pleasure and the body's new physiological maturity, they come from a smaller and more selective group of people and a narrower range of activities and emotions. These cues also build on and expand childhood cues. When they reappear later, they can trigger a powerful mix of feelings. For example, a teenager's first kiss may link the sight of the other person with anticipation and euphoria. Later, more advanced interactions can connect that person's presence with deeper emotions, bonding, or even the beginnings of parenting. These post-puberty cues don't just shape intimacy, they can also reach back into the earlier stages of seeking and recognizing, adding to them the emotions of desire and general pleasure seeking. Childhood cues matter most for the early stages of the sex instinct, recognizing the sex of others from the signals they broadcast, and developing attraction toward one sex or the other. In addition, they jumpstart the interactions of unexperienced individuals. The adult cues reach further, carrying into not only sexual attraction and desire, but also pair bonding, parenting, and the broader emotional life that grows out of intimate relationships.